Oh boy, spicy meatball time. So, in this is 17 pounds of awesome. It is engineering, and just like you guys, I actually buy a lot of stuff from the internet to take a look at, because it's a little bit for real and a little bit for forums and a little bit, I've got an itch and we have to solve the mystery. There's 17 pounds of motherboard in here. You already know, you clicked the title, but the story behind this is a lot of suffering on my part, and I'm actually going to complain. Usually I don't complain about the politics and nonsense behind the curtain, but I'm going to complain a little bit in this one. Just a little bit. Alright, so, first thing, this is WRX90. This was originally supposed to launch, according to multiple sources inside of AMD, alongside the TRX50. It did not. Well, kind of. Strictly speaking, it did, if you're Dell or HP, and at least Dell and HP, and to a lesser extent Lenovo, could get you systems in their hands. And those are really nice systems to be sure, but for the DIY segment, we're not a lot of people anyway, it's fine. This is not a motherboard sample, and I also have to be a little bit cautious with these now, because sometimes the early versions of these motherboards are not exactly the same as the actual retail shipping motherboards. And this is also really weird because Asus provided motherboards to B&H Photo and Newegg even ahead of some of their boutique retailers. It doesn't make any sense because the boutique retailers will, test the board, find problems, see what doesn't work. And already, at least one, well, it's looking like a strong 2 of the WRX90s that arrived and shipped through B&H Photo were dead on arrival. DOA. Yeah, kind of sucks. This one, I literally don't know because I literally just took it out of the box. But I'm shooting this video while I'm still feeling a little spicy because that's what we're gonna do. This is 7 PCIe 5 slots, 32 teamed power stages, dual 10 gigabit Ethernet, server grade IPMI remote management. This one actually has it built in, so this is 8 memory channels. This is one of the highest end boards that you can get for the new Threadripper Pro. And it is for Threadripper Pro. The non-Pro CPUs will not work in this. I'm going to be using a 96 core monster CPU in this. Also not sent by AMD. Well, not technically. I think AMD blessed the project, but not directly technically from AMD. Pro boards and Pro setups and Pro everything else had to come from an OEM. You have to buy it or have to be friends with Dell or Lenovo or HP or have a corporate account and buy it. And so a lot of the people on our forum that do like the corporate purchasing and everything else, they got their hands on systems, and so I can remote into it and play with it and all that kind of stuff. And that's fine. That suits me just fine, being able to remote into a system, play with it, run console, whatever it is that I need to do. That is no problem at all. I did have some questions about stuff that I saw, and so I set up an appointment. And I was ghosted. And then I emailed the questions. Just basic stuff to start. Also ghosted. So not a really professional look from Asus. I asked some of my industry contacts about that, and they're like, oh yeah, that happens. So it's fine. I really am a computer janitor in doing all of this. Asus does not care. It doesn't matter that this is the pinnacle of engineering with just a few really minor annoying things that people get DOA boards for on the forum. Like, that doesn't matter. It's still the pinnacle of engineering. But annoying. Anyway, let's get building. Well, you know what's not fun? Sitting through hours and hours and hours of memory training. This is the Pro platform. You expect the Pro platform to be a little bit more polished. Generally, Asus does pretty good here. My Zeta R5 DIMMs, this goes back to Sapphire Rapids days. I'm really pushing my luck, expecting 6,000 and 6,400 memory kits to work on this platform that were originally designed for Intel Sapphire Rapids. Generally it does, although not necessarily with all 8 DIMMs. Sometimes you'll have postcode 0D for like an hour plus. Sometimes one side of the processor will work, but not the other. Generally, it works better with server grade memory. 16, 32 gigabyte DIMMs, those aren't much of a challenge for this motherboard in general. 64, 128, and 256 gigabyte DIMMs are a lot more of a challenge for this platform, so be sure to check out Asus's QVL list. I mean, that's what it's there. It's memory that Asus says they've checked. Server memory is going to be rated for 5600 or 4800, and 5600 is brand new on the scene. 5600 seems to be a little problematic with this board, And it also seems like it has the bug that was left over from Threadripper 5000 series, where 7 of the 8 DIMM slots work. That was something that originally surfaced on the Level 1 forums, where if you put a terabyte of memory in Asus's WRX90E motherboard, it would only detect 7 DIMMs. It turns out that was a bug with the motherboard, and it seems like maybe in some scenarios this board has a similar bug. I'm on BIOS 0404, and I'm sure that by the time you're watching this, there's another BIOS that probably takes care of that. Check out the Level 1 forums or anything like that. Now, it might feel like I'm describing a show-stopping critical problem, but this really isn't. This is just new platform stuff. By and large, you'll probably not have an issue like this, but I'm just letting you know that if you do encounter these kinds of things, this is generally what you can do for troubleshooting. It's just move your DIMMs around, try one DIMM, just populate one DIMM in A1, get the system to boot and be stable, clear CMOS. You know, you gotta go through this rigmarole. And DDR5 memory takes a long time to train, so you really have to give it like 10 minutes between each try. So it can be frustrating and easy to lose your patience, but yeah, it's fine. DDR5 on desktop platforms was also very problematic, but for DDR5 server platforms, including Intel Sapphire Rapids, that has been basically a trouble-free plug-and-play experience when we're talking about all these different memory kits and different configurations, because even these really fast memory kits, like our 6400 Zeta R Neo kit of memory, this will not post in 6400. Like the first time you put it in, it's going to come up in JEDEC 4800. Like it doesn't automatically just immediately try to go to the 6400 profile. And then from there you can experiment, you clear the CMOS, and it'll be back to the JEDEC standard 4800 profile. A lot of people don't understand that, but that's how it works. So you're pretty safe to experiment here, and worst case scenario, go down to 1 DIMM. But basically we're okay. At the rear I/O, we've got a BIOS flash port, so yes, you can upgrade the BIOS for this out of band without even logging into the BMC. Technically, you don't need this. This is just a convenience thing because you can remote into the motherboard even when it's off, thanks to the remote management interface. Then we've got the button to do that fancy maneuver there. Then we've got USB 4, yes, native USB 4 right on board with 2 mini DisplayPort inputs. We've also got 6 10 gigabit ports that are Type A, our Realtek 1 gig Ethernet port for our out-of-band management, our dual 10 gig Ethernet port from our Intel X710 controller. We also got a VGA port which is tied to our AST2600, that's for remote management. There's 2 analog audio jacks, and there's also a clear CMOS button. It's a pretty good I/O. Asus usually has some more USB I/O at the rear, but this is pretty good. Now, in terms of the board layout, we have 4 M.2 on board. 2 of them are 22110, 2 of them are 2280. All 4 of them are 4 lanes at PCI Express 5. There's also 2 Slim SAS ports, which are rated for PCI Express 4.0 x 4 for NVMe. There's also 4 SATA 6 gigabit per second ports. In terms of expansion slots, there is 1 PCIe 5 x 16 that is X8 electrical, and 6 PCIe 5.0 x 16 slots. Good lord. Asus is bringing all of the Gen 5 connectivity to this motherboard. It's no wonder that it costs $1,600. As with the TRX50 Sage, which in my opinion should have been called the Ace, not the Sage, but hey, cool, whatever. Both of these boards support dual power supply, meaning that you can physically connect to 2 power supplies. Keep in mind this is BIOS 0404, so your BIOS almost certainly is better than this one. The AI overclock tuner, memory frequency tuner, this is all the stuff that you would not have in a server grade BIOS. So the Asus features are there, they just look like they're behind a server grade BIOS. You also have a really nice interface for the per core curve optimizer. And the curve optimizer is one way that you can get a free performance bump. It's a way that you can get a 100% stable overclock on the AMD platform. You should look into that. But Asus really does give you a lot of knobs and tunables here for being able to control this. Tweaker's Paradise, yes, Tweaker's Paradise is here. That's an Asus feature. It also has AI features, an AI overclock tuner. You can basically let this run on your cooler. There's a recalibrate. Cooler efficiency customize, recalibrate cooler, to recalibrate for this platform. That works particularly well, and Falcon Northwest leverages this for their systems that they build. So you can get a Falcon Northwest OC profile, but it's not a insane, unstable overclock profile. It's actually a very good overclock profile that'll give you stability in the system. As with all things, the AMD FTPM is here. There have been a couple reports on the Level 1 forums of stutters and inconsistency in performance with the FTPM on 7000 series Ryzen's. As right now that I'm shooting this video, that's unsubstantiated, but I did get some FTPM or some TPM modules to replace the FTPM to do some experiments there. For compiling code with the Unreal Engine, it does seem to make the system a little less stuttery, but that's just anecdotal, sample size of 1. I'm investigating that. Also want to call special attention to the PCIe redriver tuning. Slots 5, 6, and 7 have Gen 5 redrivers, and the redrivers for those slots can make it a little more advantageous to you if you use PCIe to something else adapters to drive either Gen 4 or Gen 5 adapters. Other than that, Asus insists on X16, PCIe RAID, and GPU at M.2 storage. To translate that out of Asus speak, it's X16, X4, 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 X8, X4, X4. You also have full access to your X710 Intel adapter, so full points to Asus for leaving all of the options exposed. That's great. Asus does also integrate Easy Flash, so you can flash the BIOS from here. There's also access to the IPMI hardware monitor, so from this screen you can get a little bit more information about the DIMM temperatures, LAN temperatures, Threadripper temperatures, and RPMs of your fan, but for full fan control you're going to want to use the remote management. And you can also save and restore user configuration profiles for your BIOS. If you wanted to save an overclock profile and a non-overclock profile, this would be where you do it. The server management tab actually works on this because this motherboard does have built-in remote management. That's what the VGA port is. Now my board did not come with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built in. They're missing from the M.2 at the bottom edge of the board, but you do have BIOS options for enabling and disabling that M.2. This is the labeling used for that. Under PCIe subsystems, that's where your resize bar support is. It's disabled by default. You can enable it. And note that enabling it with USB4, that as media USB4 controller and everything else, can be a little sketchy. It just depends. It depends on your particulars. In case you're wondering, what's the AMI virtual CD-ROM and virtual hard disk? That's from the remote management. You can load an ISO remotely or store one on the micro SD, or heck, you can even store screen recordings of the VGA monitor crashing, or the operating system when the system crashes or reboots. Video of that can be saved to the micro SD that's right on the motherboard. You can also load an ISO directly from the micro SD. A lot of micro SD options if you choose to use the micro SD. The remote management features on these boards, I mean, it really does add at least $100 of value if you need the remote management feature. Also, discrete USB4 features menu. This is something to look for because if you're looking for backward compatibility with like Thunderbolt 2 or 3 devices, you may have to mess around in here. You may also have to mess around with PCIe bus numbering, especially under Linux, because the Linux kernel doesn't always reserve bus numbers the way that it should. Although mostly I think those bugs have been fixed on recent kernels, but it's something to keep an eye on. Overall, Asus has put a lot more polish in this versus its TRX counterpart in terms of, hiding the obviously useless options, mostly. Good job, Asus. Oh, let's talk suspend resume. AMD moved mountains to get S3 sleep, suspend resume, put your computer to sleep, come back to it, to work correctly on TRX50. There are explicit warnings in the manual on the WRX90 motherboards, and this is going to be platform specific, not a complaint against Asus or AMD specifically. When you're running an 8 DIMM configuration, it disables sleep. The reason for that is because these DIMMs use so much power that there's not enough standby power to keep all the DIMMs properly powered. You see, the memory specification doesn't really have a lot of stuff in it to do with sleep modes or low power states or anything like that. It just isn't in the specification. So you kind of need to keep the machine going. Now, for 128 gigabyte DIMMs, the measured power is just about 200 watts, a worst case scenario, peak power draw. 200 watts for memory? Yeah. The good news is that for the power supplies that I've tested, 3 amps of standby current is enough, but you don't get the sleep option by default. You have to turn on an option in BIOS. 128 gig DIMMs on the WRX90, a little problematic on my testing. I'm also pretty able to consistently trigger the 0D memory training issue, as are people on our forum. And since this board launched at retail and people have been able to buy it, in the community we've had a total of 7 people with boards. 2 of them haven't really had any issues that rise to the level of complaints, but the other 5 have had varying levels of issue. We had one that we thought was a DOA board, but it may not have been a DOA board. There is actually some sort of compatibility issue with 4090 GPUs. But NVIDIA has issued a vBIOS update for 4090s to get them to post. And so, you know, postcode 91, 92, 93, those are PCIe initialization errors. 0D is a memory training issue. With 128 gig DIMMs, 7 of 8 DIMMs work pretty consistently for me, but getting 8 DIMMs to work without having postcode 0D has been a little bit of a challenge depending on the memory kit. Interestingly, the Expo memory kits, especially the 8 and 16 gig varieties, much less problematic than 64 and 128 gigs. I don't know how many people are DIYing a workstation that has 128 gig DIMMs. You're probably buying that from a major system integrator or letting somebody like Falcon Northwest go through the suffering for you. Did you know that this motherboard also features Thunderbolt? Well, okay, we can't call it Thunderbolt, PCIe Tunlink USB4, but it looks like this motherboard is going to have better compatibility, especially with older Thunderbolt devices, even than some of Intel's newer Thunderbolt chipsets. Yeah, I mean, if you don't have to go far, there's a lot of users in the level 1 community, and there have been some issues that they've had with Thunderbolt 2 devices. Well, I've got some early reports that compatibility with those devices on this ASMedia chipset is better than what we were seeing previously. We would see like Frankenstein's monster of, a Threadripper 5000 CPU plus an Intel Thunderbolt chipset sort of being wedged together, and not always leading to the best customer service experience when we're talking about older devices. Well, on this platform from Asus, they've apparently put a lot of work into that to get Thunderbolt working correctly, and so far the results that we're seeing very, very encouraging. So Asus appears to have done an excellent job with the USB4 implementation on this motherboard, which is going to be huge for anybody that has a bunch of Thunderbolt peripherals, new and old alike. Beyond that, this is basically the pinnacle of WRX90 platforms. If I've scared you off of DIYing it, might I suggest you check out Falcon Northwest. Falcon Northwest offers this configuration pre-made, ready to go with all of the headache taken out of it. I've been very impressed with Falcon Northwest systems. It is an insane level of engineering. I have made a mess inside of mine, but you can get one directly from Falcon Northwest. And they're not even paying me to say that. It's just something that has come to my attention, which is amazing. You can also pick up workstations from Dell, Lenovo, and HP if your purchasing department is more comfortable with Dell, Lenovo, or HP, but you're going to get a lot more horsepower out of your Falcon Northwest system, and potentially in a more petite package, which is very impressive what they do. I've certainly been very impressed with my Talon system, and now this rack mount system, which I'm getting ready to do some COMSOL testing on. Fun times. As soon as I get all 8 channels of memory to work with 128 gig DIMMs, because that's just how we roll here at Level 1. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. This has been a quick look at the Asus WRX90 motherboard, one of the first WRX90 motherboards to hit retail availability. How about that? It's not bad. It's a pretty good board. It is the pinnacle of hardware engineering, just marred by being ghosted by Asus reps and minor annoying quirks with the hardware because of early adoption. Look for those BIOS updates. Alright, I'm signing out, and you can find me in the Level 1 forums for when you inevitably have questions. Alright, I'll see you there.